Okay? It doesn't like it.
This computer doesn't like the clicker?
It doesn't like it.
Do we need to switch to the other computer?
It might not be a bad idea.
Okay.
I mean, I would rather use this one because this is where everything is and where you know everything works.
Yeah.
Okay, if there is some way to, it might need to be installed.
Okay. So you wanna? Is there a way to mute the screen?
It already is. It already is.
You're the best.
I'm glad somebody thinks so.
Okay. So there's your screen, Majora, your confidence screen.
Oh, good. Okay. Oh, with this I don't need it.
Okay, now how does one jump out of this and into make it work mode?
If you want me to, I can do like an MBA type introduction.
There we go. And then you want to install. I don't see it.
I don't
see this. Login tab.
With that, I like NBA actually. That would be hilarious.
Now is this under drives because it might be?
They're going to. He wants you to ask that people wait till the mic comes before they start speaking. Alright. So I will leave you all to it.
Okay, so we just hit play to make this do what we want.
Yep.
Okay, I will go in the back and make sure that it is coming up the way it should. Don't go too far.
What?
Don't go too far.
So do I do it now or?
Yeah, just let me check and make sure that we're seeing it the way we're supposed to.
Oh, up there. Got it. Looks good? Oh, I should have gone through a couple of pieces, but if that first one looks fine, then this
Yeah, I
one does
wasn't
too.
even seeing that.
Huh?
I'm not even seeing that.
Oh wait, you said it doesn't look good.
Yeah, I don't see it at all. It could be a resolution issue. Do you know how to change your resolutions?
Yep.
Okay, let me go in the back and take a look. When I see it, I will let you know.
Do you wanna call me?
I'm standing right.
Oh, you're back. I'm sorry. I thought you were going up there. Okay. Oh, I know what it is. That's weird. I think I'm looking at the wrong. It's supposed to be in displays. Okay. Seriously? Fuck me. Oh, Jesus. Can you come here? Yes, you do. Let's see. Okay, this is very disconcerting.
Theoretically, your display should flash off if there is a...
So it's saying I need a newer version of Keynote, which doesn't make any sense because I'm sorry? It's saying I need a newer version of Keynote, which is bizarre because this is what I've been working on. Oh God. What
Okay,
version?
do you have it on a flash
I
drive?
don't know if I can.
Because at this point, I would like to at least see it
Yes, me too.
in the back of the room. Okay, it flashed. That's
Yeah.
a good sign. Okay, these two will not fit side by side.
No, I know. I'm just getting this out. Do you know the, is there a Wi-Fi in here? Or that's
Yes,
publicly
there-
accessible? Which one is it?
Event router 6.
Let's see if that's there. Yeah, the problem is it's somehow, I guess overnight, it changed into a newer version of Keynote, which is why it's not opening, because it certainly was, and now it's deciding.
Oh, so you can't even run your presentation
I can't even
from this
from
one.
here, no.
Okay, so let's go ahead and,
So I put it downloaded onto yours, onto that.
okay.
Okay, so let's see if, make sure you got it. Or, yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Fuck me.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. This is a call and response moment. We are expecting everyone to be bright and bushy-tailed. We fed you last night and this morning, and we are excited about this day. My name is Jair Lynch. During the day, I run an investment and development company here in Washington, D.C., but at nights, weekends, and all my other free time, I work on Locust. I am the president of Locust and welcome you this morning. Locust is a group of forward-thinking developers who care deeply about creating extraordinary neighborhoods and places. We come together for many reasons, for the fellowship, for the work, but primarily because no one else in the country is looking to advocate and affect policy on housing and transportation issues the way that Locust is. And so we find our work very challenging, but we also find it very rewarding. It is amazing of how far we've come in terms of what transit-oriented development is about, what equitable development is all about. The developers in the room have felt that every single day. The pain of that every single day. I have the scars, I have the limp, I have the gray hair, I have the lawsuits, I have all the things that go along with trying to put together transit-oriented development. But I also have the knowledge that there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people around the country who are better off because of the built environment that we create. We know that their quality of life is improved, and we can see that in some of the outcomes that are happening with their children. And so as we get ready for today, get excited, get energized, and as I said last night, think about what Parker Palmer talks about, which is the tragic gap, the hard realities of what we have today in this building, down the street, around the corner, but also the reality of the awareness of what the possibilities can be in the future. So I welcome everyone today, and I'd like to introduce Mayor Robin Tanhill from Oxford, Mississippi.
Good morning. All righty, got you warmed up. I like it. Welcome to the 2018 LOCUS Leadership Summit. Thank you to everyone in this room for your leadership and for your commitment to making better communities across our nation. It is truly a pleasure to be here before you today as the Local Leaders Council and the First and Main Coalition come together with Locust, Coalition of Real Estate Developers. When I look around this room and as I got to visit with people last night, you meet folks from different regions, different states, but we share common goals and common opportunities and challenges. The folks in this room are the drivers of change and innovation, and we all have a common thread or we wouldn't be here. We all want to make a difference and leave this place better than we found it. We've got a unique opportunity today to discuss the ways that we can all navigate together in order to create vibrant, inclusive, walkable, and healthy neighborhoods. This year's theme of Rebuilding America's Neighborhoods has made me kind of think about what neighborhood means. I think about the homes that line the streets, the sidewalks that connect us to places, the small family businesses that provide essential services, the parks where our children play, the schools that provide quality education. But most of all, I think about the sense of community. Everyone in this room plays a critical role in putting together the patchwork quilts that are our communities. Oxford, Mississippi is a town of about 22,000 people. We have another 20,000 on campus at the University of Mississippi, and it's also a place where a developer from Chicago told me recently is the only place he'd ever seen where we sell land by the tablespoon instead of by the acre. So come on, developers, doesn't that make you want to come? Utilizing smart growth principles has been critical to us in preserving the parts of our community that we treasure while encouraging growth of neighborhoods. Meeting the needs of growing communities in the face of dwindling state and federal funds can be a daunting task and one that we all balance, but we have a common voice, and together our voice is strong. In order for our communities to achieve success, we are going to need to use this combined voice to remind our state and federal officials how important national funding programs like the National Endowment for the Arts, brownfields, Tiger, and CDBG grants are for the success of our communities. So I'm excited about this day. We can all learn so much from each other, whether you're in real estate or planning and development or an elected official. I encourage you today to take advantage of the opportunity to meet with and learn from members of different sectors as well as your own colleagues. I certainly look forward to learning from all of you today. Thank you.
How are you guys feeling this morning? Well, for those who did not join us last night, I am Christopher Coase, Vice President at Smart Growth America and Director of Locust. So again, on behalf of our President at Smart Growth America, Calvin Gladney, I just want to welcome you all here today. With that, I would be remiss if I did not thank a couple of individuals who made this last 3 or 4 days possible. And first and foremost, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce to you the Locust National Steering Committee. If you guys would just please stand. I know you guys are in the audience, so please stand. All right. You can be seated. For the past 7 years, the LOCUS Leadership Summit, hosted by our National Steering Committee, which are, as Jair pointed out, are a number of the forward-thinking real estate developers and investors across the country who truly believe in triple bottom line. And for those of you who may not be aware of triple bottom line, is that while developers recognize that projects have to pencil and make a buck, we also have to recognize that these projects actually help people and, at the end of the day, protect and enhance our planet. And with that, I also would like to take this opportunity to thank the Federal Transit Administration, who sponsors the TOD Peer Network Group. For those who are part of the TOD Peer Network Group, just to wave your hand. I know there are quite a few of you guys here. Just show your hands. Perfect. This is a collaboration of local planners, developers, mayors, and interested parties who are trying to figure out how to do transit-oriented development the right way. Also, as Mayor Tannehill pointed out, we're also joined by a group of mayors and county executives, part of the Local Leaders Council and First and Main. Just for those who are here, just raise your hand. Our mayors, great. Now, I will say this, and I said this last night, one of the amazing things about that comes out of the Locus Leadership Summit, for one, is the fact that it's one of the few times you get the real estate community, the elected officials, and the real estate professionals and nonprofits in the same room at the same time, and more importantly, a deal can actually get done. So I say this again, as I said last night, if you do not get a deal done at your table, I did not do my job correctly. So with that, I was chatting with Chris Zimmerman earlier, and I think there are a number of elected officials who have currently an RFP or know an RFP is coming. And for those who do have an RFP right now or have an RFP that's on the way, raise your hand. So if you're a real estate developer, you should hover right here, right over there, right back there with Kathy. So I use that to say, use this opportunity, use this day as an opportunity to make those connections and those relationships. But of course, doing deals is a nice thing. But more importantly, what makes the Leadership Summit different from a lot of other real estate conferences is that it actually brings the right minds, the true advocates for equitable development together to use their collective voice to change policy at the federal level. As Jair mentioned, Locust is the only real estate development company, organization dedicated to pushing equitable development on the national level. And one of the things I'm really excited about for the last 7 years, each and every day I'm constantly reminded that it's real estate developers who are calling their members of Congress, calling their senators, calling the administration to express how important it is to protect programs like CDBG, Community Development Block Grants, or Tiger funding, or other like home and affordable housing funds, or fighting to protect historic tax credit in the recent tax bill, or even creating new financing opportunities for transit-oriented development within TIFIA and the RIF program. I think that, to me, is what makes this day and tomorrow really special. And I'm really excited to have you guys here to be a part of that. Now, as I said before, I want to also thank two other individuals, HRS, who is one of our leading corporate sponsors, as well as the Bar Foundation, who has been a longtime partner not only to Smart Growth America, but to the Locust organization. Now, I've been instructed by staff to just remind you, if you have not downloaded Whova, please do so now. And one of the key elements, as you know, we are going paperless this year, but if you're looking to make friends and connect, you should do that through the app as well. Also, we are asking you after each session, use your app to rate the sessions because we want to figure out more ways to improve the conference for next year. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Majora Carter. So let me just read her bio really quickly. Majora Carter is a leading urban revitalization consultant, real estate developer, and Peabody winner broadcaster. She is responsible for the creation and implementation of numerous green infrastructure projects, policies, job training, and placement systems. At Sustainable South Bronx, Majora Carter deployed MIT's first ever mobile fab lab, a digital fabrication laboratory in South Bronx, where it served as the earliest iteration of the makerspace found anywhere today. The project drew residents and visitors across the region together to create new collaboratives and new products. After establishing the Sustainable South Bronx and Green for All, among other organizations, Majora went on to carry out work where she created a new private consulting firm to help spread the message and success of social enterprise, economic development in low-status communities, which was recently best named Best for the World B Corporation in 2014. And I'm going to take a personal liberty to say, I met Majora about 3 years ago at a real estate executive council where I have to say, I've never seen anyone with great grace and passion articulate why it's essential for the real estate development community to get in equitable development. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Majora Carter.
I felt the same way about Christopher, and I know you guys do as well. So I'm just going to wait to see. Okay, if you can make that a little full size, that'd be great. Hold on one second. I'm so sorry. As you can see, technology is awesome when it works well. And, okay, does anybody know how to make this? I don't know how to make this bigger. We're coming, yay. Okay. I'm gonna get out the way. So I can breathe now. You know, there's that moment when your tech doesn't work and you think you're going to die. Like that, I just had that, so. Just give me a moment. Thank you, everybody who contributed to making that happen. I'm a totally visual person, and I feel completely crippled unless I've got pictures, so you don't have to look at me. Anywho, so thank you again for having me here, and it really is an honor to be here because I think you guys get it. And so hopefully none of this will be news to you, but hopefully it will also inspire you to even think about how much more we can do. But have any of you ever visited the Google offices, either in New York or in Mountain View, or actually any place where Google has its empire? Yeah, they're kind of cool, right? Like I love the fact there's like a full day a week that people can actually just devote to passion projects on their dime. You know, stock options, paid transportation to and from their places of business, and of course the free snacks and the ping pong tables in the hallway, you know, kind of help people too. But the interesting thing is that Google understands that tech companies have to compete for talent. They create a corporate culture that's attractive enough to help ensure that a certain loyalty from their team so that they're less inclined to leave. Now imagine if that talent retention approach was actually applied in low status communities. And by low status, I mean the communities where the schools are worse, where the air is dirtier, the parks and the trees are fewer and less well maintained, the health statistics are not very good. Oh gosh, and where elected officials acknowledge all these disparities, but as campaign tools, but nothing ever really changes. Low status communities are places where inequality is actually assumed, both inside and outside of those communities. But if we look at low status communities like as if they were corporations and made it our business to keep the talent from leaving, we would have a very different social and economic landscape from which to hold conferences like this today. Instead, we have, in low status communities, a failure retention model. And the well-intentioned efforts of activists and service providers, philanthropy, and government often serve to repel talent. And when we survey people in their 20s and 30s in communities like the one I'm from, and especially the ones who we know are going to graduate high school and go on to college, and there's a lot more of them now actually coming up, even from my neighborhood, which is kind of amazing. And we ask them what the community needs, and without a doubt, they'll say things like community centers, health clinics, programs, and affordable housing. But if we ask them if they intend, with all the future success that they're going to get from working really hard and going to college, what they want in the community of their dreams, and would they actually seek out a community like the one they just mentioned and go and live there? They totally recoil. So they want to live in places that don't think of community centers and health centers as like the places to be. Instead, they want the bars. They want the cool coffee shops. They want the restaurants. They want housing that matches their income. They don't want the markers of poverty. And so the subsidized affordable housing for the lowest for the lowest AMI levels, definitely, it's a lucrative gig for developers, get that. But it also entrenches a transient landless class in low status communities, essentially the equivalent of an hourly wage worker in our community as a corporation. Investments in their future wealth, however, in their future wealth generating capacity with housing and business development that addresses their aspirations for their lives, complete with lifestyle infrastructure such as those nice bars and cafes and coffee shops and restaurants, as well as home ownership supports for people who need them. Those are like stock options if we're thinking of our community as a corporation, because company success equals individual success. But currently, individual successes leave as soon as possible for the most part in low status communities. And when those communities lose that talent, that homegrown talent in particular, they lose the day-to-day consumer dollars that they'll allow local businesses to thrive. They lose everyday examples for success, making it harder to reach the next generation. They lose reinvestment capital in the family home that daddy may have bought in the 1980s when nobody was really looking at that place. Then they liquidate those assets, which we know that home ownership is often one of the first ways for people to accumulate wealth in this country, but they liquidate that asset usually for cheap. So I've noticed that within the nonprofit industrial complex, there is this distasteful attitude about people in low status communities creating and retaining wealth. It's almost as if they're not authentic anymore. We saw the problem of status quo development, and as part of my consulting practices, I don't presume anything. I actually launch stuff within the context that I'm working. So I wanted to broaden the idea of who should do development and expand an approach that creates reasons for the emotional as well as economic wealth creation in low status communities designed to retain talent and not repel it. So I actually grew up in the South Bronx, which was a case study for the kind of things of how to repel talent. It was literally on fire. And we, thanks to financial disinvestment banks were not loaning in these places that were redlined. We lost about 60% of the population within our community. My dad's investment back when he bought it in our house in the 1940s was worth pretty much nothing by the time I came of age. What we did, and so that formerly walk-to-work community that actually had a thriving manufacturing sector in it, that actually really built stuff, those things were, financial disinvestment made it so that those companies either went out of state or offshored and called it a day. And what took its place was this kind of environmental degradation. And so I was literally taught, from the time I was this big, that I was going to grow up and be somebody. And, I was a smart kid, you're going to grow up and go away to college. And, and I was like, yes, like watching the neighborhood burn around me. My brother was killed when I was a little kid because of the gang violence that happened around there. And I was like, yeah, I got it, I'm gone. So I took my little big brain and walked to Bronx High School of Science, Wesleyan University, NYU, and that's when I was at home in New York City when I went to graduate school and was so broke I had to stay with my parents. which was like great. But moving back home really put me in the situation where I saw my neighborhood in a completely different light. And it might have simply been because I did have some education and some distance and realized that our communities didn't just happen that way. Because when I came back home, I came face to face with the fact right at the time when our city was planning on building a huge waste facility on our waterfront, and they were planning on just expanding the amount of waste that our community was about to handle, even though we handled an enormous amount of it. And that's when I was like, this is happening because this is a low status community of color, very poor, politically vulnerable. And again, because I was one of those kids who was taught to measure success by how far she could get away from her community, which is a lot of us, you know, I don't think anyone would have blamed me if I just like said, all right, this is really too bad, I'm sorry, and went about my business. But instead I decided to be a part of to actually do something about it. And so I decided instead of thinking about like what doesn't our community have, what can we actually bring to it that's actually here, and develop some assets that are there. So basically started working on doing redevelopment, in particular around landscape. Discovered a dump that had been used that way for 30-some years. We found a tiny little seed grant that from the U.S. Forest Service that essentially allowed us to pay for things like lunch for volunteers. Pretty much not much more than that. But what it did do, it has also allowed me to create connections between both public and private partnerships with other city agencies and even companies who actually helped us do things like get rid of the tires that were dumped in that place for like that. So it turns into that we were able to then transform it into this little beta version. But what happened after that was that even though we had known that people, we talked to people a lot about, well, where do they go and what kind of community they want, what do they want in their neighborhood, and parks was one of them. We didn't have that culture, so we had to create programming as well to get people down to that waterfront. You know, whether it was boat building programs or environmental stewardship or just lots and lots of parties with Latin and hip-hop music playing, it didn't make any difference. Now this is one of my absolute favorite pictures in the world because I'd be doing this work and just gaining awareness around it, trying to get financing around the whole thing. And as you can see, I'm just kind of posing for this picture with my parks commissioner and my mayor like standing next to me because I'm like, dude, I already did this work and now it's time for you to pay up. And that's exactly what happened. And I'm literally posing, like smiling through my teeth to Versa in front of me, take my picture, take my picture. And she did, so there you go. But it was, anyway, we were able to transform it from that into this. And this is the Hunts Point Riverside Park as it exists right now today. And it's really just this place that reflects really beautifully back on folks in our communities, to the point where at first people were kind of wondering, is this for them? Because they hadn't seen anything this beautiful in our communities. It was, in fact, the first waterfront park we'd had in our neighborhood in 60 years, so there was something to it. But to have something like this that was distinctly ours, that they didn't have to travel to find, you know, a park of this level of beauty was a big deal. I actually got married there as well in 2006. Actually, that's the dog that pulled me into the park, because if I didn't have like some big 80-pound crazy dog with me, I would not have gone into this site as it was when I found it, which was horrific. So it was a very cool place to get married, I have to say, with 300 of my nearest and dearest friends and family. But we just raised the bar for what passed, you know, for the kind of park development in our community. We actually beat out Millennial Park in Chicago for an Excellence in Urban Design Award. So there my puppy is with her award. Thank you very much. But presenting that different image of ourselves was a real big thing, because let's think about it. Poverty, because that is, it's almost as if when you think about in our communities, there's like, when you think of poverty as a cultural attribute, is it something worth preserving? You know, because in low status communities, you find a lot of low-income people, and in those areas, low income is actually associated with neighborhood preservation. Like, why are they connected? Like, you're preserving the poverty because that's a part of the neighborhood, and I just don't. And I think it's a really big mistake that we often make. And because I don't know how the way y'all think of your ancestors, but I think our ancestors wanted us to be rich, straight up, and you know, we didn't survive the middle, they didn't survive the Middle Passage so that we can come here and just continue this. So it's a really interesting thing that we're really trying to move on about, because I think it's a really interesting thing. So if poverty is a cultural attribute and something worth preserving, when you ask people, what do you actually desire in your community, in the community you desire, not the community that you're in. It's a big difference. So the community that you desire. So what I found when we surveyed literally hundreds of people were things that people thought very differently than the nonprofit industrial complex that tends to believe that poverty is this cultural attribute that's something worth preserving. That interestingly enough, the people in low status communities kind of wanted the same thing in their communities that middle class people did. And I bet they didn't want the same things that middle class people didn't want either. Like nobody was out there saying we wanted more health clinics and we're thinking about the community of their dreams. Not the one that they were in, but what they actually thought about. You know, they wanted the coffee shops, the restaurants, and all those things, and the nice parks and all of that good stuff. Because it's really important to think about that in terms of the context of how our communities are developed. Like, do we really think that we can, you know, create better neighborhoods without people feeling like they've got to move out of them in order to live in a better one? And we're actually challenging that notion. And so, as we also knew that let me go back to this, because we really believe there's two kinds of real estate development. The kind that assumes gentrification, which is just, you know, poor people get pushed out because of, you know, waves of developers and speculators coming in and buying up property. And then there's the other kind that assumes that there's a lot more in it. So and I'll give you a little bit of that, because these are the kind of things going to the first type of gentrification. These are actual notices that I get under my door pretty much every day. Like I could update this all the time. Somebody's trying to buy my house for cash, because we don't see that there's that there isn't a level of, you know, value in our own communities, because again we've been taught to measure success by how far we get away from any community, by how far we get away from our communities. There are still others from the outside, the speculators, who absolutely see this level of value and want to see more of it in every single way, because again, the other kind of real estate development in low status community, we call it poverty level economic maintenance. And so it's the kind of place that assumes where you see things like this, where, you know, you don't have really great options for the kind of food that you'd like to eat. There aren't many great examples of the kind of economic development that makes you feel as though, you know, the person behind the counter actually really wants your business. And if you had opportunities, you will go to other places to spend your money, because this doesn't make you feel like you're a valued customer. I'm a girl who loves a bargain, but we have 3 99-cent stores in 3 blocks. You know, and these dollar store things are really, that's the kind of things you see all the time. And ways to either, because there's often a lot of pretty sick people in these communities as well. So either people are medicating, and actually that's also an extremely big business, or self-medicating in many ways. Also, there's a number of liquor stores within the same place. If you're interested in building your own financial well-being, you're not going to be able to do that in a low-status community with just what's in there. You could, however, have the regressive, you know, informal taxation of being poor, you know, with all the payday loan centers and the check cashing stores, you know, basically places that charge you for your own money, you know, that kind of stuff, that's what you find there as well. And last but definitely not least, very large amounts of very highly subsidized affordable housing, affordable for the lowest AMI levels, and you'll see this. And so before anybody starts going, oh, Majora Carter hates poor people in poor communities, blah, 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 that's just not true. What I do hate, what I absolutely do abhor, and what I'm literally using my entire practice to work on, is the fact that it's understanding that when you concentrate poverty, you concentrate all of the issues associated with it that allegedly philanthropy and government and everybody else has been trying to deal with for all these years. You exacerbate poor health outcomes, lower rates of educational attainment, higher rates of all things related to the prison industrial complex. And I think most importantly, the lack of hope that is experienced in those communities where they know that they are doomed to failure because they stayed there, because again, poverty is considered that cultural attribute that doesn't necessarily go away. And again, just because other folks in our communities don't see the value in it and others do, And that's why the typical gentrification model is so ferocious. It is just as ferocious, if you ask me, to continue to exacerbate this poverty level economic maintenance in low status communities as well. Because what's interesting is I don't really believe that gentrification happens just when you start seeing white folks in a community of color, or doggy daycare start cropping up. That's not when it happens. It's when we tell folks within those communities that those communities have no value, because then it makes it easy for them to be picked off, for them to sell their house for cheaper than it's worth, and not be a part of the future economic trends and growth in that own community. And also it repels the future opportunities for wealth creation in their own family. That's what concentrated poverty does. And yes, I do hate that. So our approach, so when we looked at the things around when we asked, again, hundreds of people in our community, the kind of community that they wanted, and they just played the game with me. And we were just like, okay, these are the kind of things that, we want to see in this community in the South Bronx. And they wanted things like year-round social gathering. They wanted the kind of beautiful built environment that inspired them and made them believe that this was a place that was beautiful to live in. They wanted business development that actually produced real jobs for themselves and for their children and the future generation that was coming up behind him. They understood that brain drain was real. It wasn't something that just happened in the developing world. It happened in America's low status communities of all color, and we got that out, and we were dealing with that, and it was the reason why we weren't retaining talent in our own community. I'm not the only kid that went to PS 48 and I-74 in the Hunts Point section of the Bronx that did okay for herself. There are plenty of us, but almost none of us still live in our community. Almost none of us, despite the fact that we all come back for a PS 48 reunion every year on July 4th. That doesn't matter, because there is something there that speaks to people about wanting their communities to be better, but they went for other things. And so now, and again, I have to tell you, and none of the people that I spoke to, we asked them, like, what kind of community you want to go to. Not one of them mentioned they wanted to go to a place that had more community centers. They just don't. But developers love to build buildings with community centers in them. I don't get it. But anyway, so again, this is my practice, and this is what we do. So again, we take the capital that I acquired through work, and then bring it back to the local community. So these were my responses. And so building a little coffee shop, and it was really interesting because the Times covered it, and of course had to do this like titillating article about gentrification. And it was like, okay, fine. But it was actually a pretty decent article and really good pictures. And so we partnered at first with a company that was a roaster, and they did all sorts of stuff, and they were brilliant. I can't believe they were just so unbelievably generous and wanting to support what we did, Birch Coffee. But it then became clear that we kind of needed to separate ways, and it was like a Gwyneth Paltrow uncoupling kind of thing. It was very sedate, I have to say. But having that, we realized that we needed to go at it on our own, and add things like flavors and whipped cream and big pun paninis and stuff like that to our menu, which they just didn't do. But anywho, I don't know if any of you know what I'm talking about, but that's all right. But developing this was a really incredible kind of thing to have, because we thought, gosh, we were super excited to have this little spot in our community. And honestly, it's like you keep hearing about coffee shops as the harbinger of gentrification. What we thought we were doing was reclaiming the blackest beverage on earth, okay? I was like, really? No, I don't think so. And, but you know what? Somebody else didn't think so either. A few people. So I use this phrase, self-gentrification, which I learned from the former president of Johnson C. Smith University, which is actually a HBCU down in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he used this term to describe development that was by us and for us. Within the area that they were in Charlotte, because the local community there was having a total heart attack, because they were like, oh my gosh, you're going to do this work and you're going to gentrify us out. And he's like, no. We're self-gentrifying, because this is work, this is development by us and for us. So anyway, having had a coffee shop for few months, and woke up one morning and realized that somebody, and I know exactly who they are, made these lovely little stickers. So it used my quote that was in the Times article, we like to, what does it say? We like to see the work that we do as self-gentrification. And it was attributed to me. I don't know if you can see it, but it says, local sellout, Majora Carter. And I was like, oh. And I've been called so many, some interesting things. Actually, they're really actually very funny. But this was one of my favorites, so much so that I put it on a T-shirt and sold it. That's how I roll. So thank you very much, whoever did it, because I made some money off of your lovely design, and I don't have to give you a royalty. So anywho, but that was really interesting because this harbinger of gentrification between the two. So this is me and my co-owner, who between the two of us, our families have 100 years in this community. 100 years. My family came in the 40s. Her family came in the 70s. So it's a local business. Call us what you want. She's proudly wearing her self-gentrification T-shirt, as you can see. So another thing was about, again, going back to business development. People were, when you hear folks in philanthropy in particular talking about technology, it's really strange. They talk about this digital divide as if we just had, what do you call them, access to broadband in low-status communities, everything would be fine. Actually, people have it already. It's through smartphones. It's not the best, but we have it. But the real digital divide is not about access. It's about who's a consumer and who is a producer, straight up. And if you are simply just buying technology, you're just a consumer. You're not building anything. And so what we need to do is figure out ways to create more opportunities for people to be producers. But unfortunately, I think the lack of tech diversity in America is very, very real. And I think it's a well understood issue at this point. And so it's not keeping pace. It's actually gotten worse since like all the big tech companies were like, we're going to do something about it, because it's like, I don't know what they do, but they're not really thinking about it. But the whole idea of like, we realized that these were the folks in our communities, and we thought our talent base, even though we knew lots of people, young people were digitally savvy, there was still ranges of experience, because we honestly thought when we started first looking at this issue that we were going to find mostly kids, young people, sorry, with that are high school dropouts, whatever. But then we found that. But then we also found lots of people who actually spent good money on their careers, on their education, and had either CS degrees, other types of advanced training in technology, but they were unable because due to statistical hiring bias, weren't really being employed. So we realized that what we wanted to do was actually create a kind of process that allowed us to, or a social enterprise essentially, that would allow folks to participate in the tech economy. And so the first one, the only one we have right now, is in the South Bronx. And what we did was we looked at a market-based solution to the tech diversity problem by using a B2B system. So we surveyed the market. It took us about 18 months to do so. But when we realized that there was a certain part of the software development pipeline that people were, the developers were not happy with, and it was, some of it when they would offshore this thing called quality assurance, and that's just simply software testing. And it's basically, think of a writer that has has an editor look at their work. It's the same thing. Software developers, they have something called a quality assurance analyst that does the same thing to make sure it's actually working the way it's supposed to. But for the folks that develop software that actually has a really big, heavy user interface, websites, lots of moving parts and stuff like that, or certain apps, the offshored option that exists most of the time doesn't work for them because of the time zone differences, because of language issues, because the lack of cultural competencies, and so not having a Western audience. So we realized this might be a really interesting way to provide a sort of a value-added model to local developers and actually do the product, do the service in-house up in the Bronx. And so we actually created I was able to support hiring someone who created a protocol and then the team so that we could take this service and literally give it away just to test it out, to see if it worked. And Nickelodeon, pretty big media company, and then we worked with a much smaller one called Tresenza, and we launched this protocol on them and thought, what do they think of it? And because again, weren't charging them a penny for it, and did most of the work actually in our office. But then we'd go visit our clients, and just mostly so that our teammate could get a chance to see, what it was like to be there, but also so that our clients could get a chance to see our teammates. Because again, I don't think that, even though I know that there's some instances where people really are racist and sexist in the tech industry, but I think mostly people hire who they know. And so most white guys will hire most white guys. So this was a way of getting more people, different types of people in front of them in a way that was actually, because they weren't hiring them and they weren't interning there, they were literally a part of a team. It was a way for people to get an understanding of what was going on. So that's when we realized, you know what, we have an opportunity here to actually launch this thing, because we realized that we could provide a valued service to our clients and also provide an entry-level tech job with our clients. And this is just to show that the industry is actually growing. But when we realized we went out and we put it on the street, literally, took this corner and opened it up so that we could have people on the community, literally on the community level, working in technology. As a matter of fact, these big windows served as a communications tool, because even our team members had to take turns answering the door, because people would just come in and just be fascinated, like, what are you doing here? We're used to bodegas and corner stores and, not places that look like this, and what are you doing? And, oh, can you fix my computer? It was like, no, we can't do that. But that was really sweet. But we actually were able to get people in our space, because we did things like video game tournaments, and we were able to do that mostly because we felt that, because we experienced that when we go to talk to people directly and just be like, look, we have a tech job, people would be like, okay, no. And they would automatically count themselves out before they even started, which was a really interesting thing. And but then we realized if we could talk to them about, just say, look, I see you're really good at this. And it was a good personality screen, because when people are playing video games, you can totally see who's a jerk and who's not. Like, seriously. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, true. And so, and because what we're doing is actually sort of like a team kind of thing. And like, you gotta work with each other, so it was actually kind of nice. But then it also served another incredible tool, which we didn't even know about at first, which was, interestingly enough, there was this, when we would host these events, it was, granted, in our little 700 square foot space, we would have like 150 people there in an evening, and mostly black and brown men. And so the cops would often come. And it just, not for like anything, but we realized, but first there was tension, and then we realized, these guys, and they're in uniform, they would like stand at the door and like look in, and then we realized they want to play. Oh, it was actually really kind of cute. And then, the Eric Garner non-verdict happened. It was a chokehold in Staten Island in New York City. And man, even though we had like 20 blizzards that year, it was hot in New York City around then, especially in all over the place, but especially in our communities. There was such tension. I can't even tell you. We partnered with our local police precinct to actually host a Call of Duty tournament. And it was just sort of like, it was like Hail Marys all over, because we was like, the city could have erupted. It really, really could have. And so instead, we were like, we don't know who's going to show up, but let's just play. And they did until like 2 o'clock in the morning, which was so awesome. And it was just the most inspiring moment to like be in that space, because we were the only community, or rather precinct, in the entire South Bronx that actually didn't have a rise in negative, community and police interactions during that time period. And we can't claim full credit, but we do absolutely claim part of it. Straight up, we do. So this is how we'd like to see Startup Box move over. That same space that Startup Box was in, they've since moved to my office. But now we also incubate other models there as well. Like, this is actually the first boutique fitness studio that we've had in the South Bronx ever, run by another woman from the South Bronx too. This is a Cass Gilbert designed rail station that I was able to acquire from Amtrak after they evicted all the tenants that were in there. We did this. This is a gateway project to our community. We wanted to, create something, because we just didn't want it to go back to those old days of the South Bronx when we were. When it was burning and abandoned and felt that way. And so we decided to think about how do we develop that into a really beautiful, family-friendly third space, and we're actually working to develop it into something like this, which is a food hall for local chefs. This is based on a model out in Brooklyn called Bergen, and to transform it from there to something like that. So wish us luck. And this is the last thing, and then we're gonna come up. Oh, cool. So this is a former juvenile detention facility that actually put on the city's radar back in 2011. To transform it into kind of a mixed income housing, mixed use commercial development, because it was 5 acres big, and it worked since then to develop the kind of plan to make it into something, with mixed income housing, mixed use commercial development that had, that actually looked at area growth trends around technology and light manufacturing, work it to build public space and all sorts of beautiful things like that. And what we know then is that, and also create new opportunities for different types of commercial and retail activity. And so our idea was not to just say, oh, this is going to be a cool space, but really use it to raise the bar for what passed for local economic and housing development in our city. And in the Bronx, and in particular in low-status communities around the country. And so I partnered with an amazing group of people. Really, we had the most diverse, more minority and women-owned businesses, and we did have also the big white guy developers too, because I'm not crazy. I'm not going to walk into a room with just a bunch of women and people of color. I'm an American. I know how things work. But it was just but it was a partnership, and it felt that way. And we put together this incredibly beautiful proposal with 1,200 units of mixed-income housing, mixed-use commercial development. Habitat for Humanity was building 100 units of low-income home ownership that was going to be amazing as well. Colliers worked with us. They were salivating over having about 90,000 square feet of manufacturing space within a few years to be able to offer some of their clients. And instead, our city decided to go with 2 all-white male development teams, and there's more square footage space reserved. And basically, they're building it's a low-income housing project for very low-income people, and there's more square footage reserved for health clinics and community centers than job creation. So that's what we're getting. But anyway, all that to say, I didn't need to be there. So there was something, I'm sorry. But all that to say is that, I want to be incredibly impatient about what our future can have for us, because we've done a tremendous job overall, and definitely not most folks in this room, because I know where I think your hearts and your heads are. We need to be thinking about, instead of continuing to build tributes to our collective failures, how about we start working to build monuments to hope and possibility? Thank you.
Thank you, Majora. So we're now going to go into our next panel, and I'm going to turn it over to Emily, who will introduce our panelists.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Emily Kotick, the new Executive Director of the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition. When I say that I'm the new Executive Director, I mean today is my 11th day on my new job, so very glad to be here with all of you. When Christopher originally invited me to this event, and for the past 6 years I've been at Enterprise Community Partners, where I've led their advocacy around all of the tax issues we'll be talking about today, spending most of my time on their advocacy around the low-income housing tax credit, helping to lead the Nationwide Action Coalition, where we partnered with Smart Growth and many of you in this room and on this stage to support the low-income housing tax credit. So today we're going to be talking about really what happened over the past 6 months and where are we now. We had the tax reform bill that we've been preparing for many years. And then even just a few months after tax reform, we had an omnibus spending bill that actually had a lot of wins for affordable housing and community development programs in it. So I've got a really distinguished panel to talk about these issues with us. To my left and your right, we've got Gary Heidel, who is the Chief Investment Officer of the Michigan State Housing and Development Agency. He'll be talking about the low-income housing tax credit and